guys, it's Julian here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the long-awaited how to make lo-fi house in the style of no format. As usual, you can get the full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything from the loop that you just heard in the intro is available at the top of the description, and it's also available on my Patreon if you're a patron. Check there, and yeah, let's get started. Alright, so we're on 128 BPM, a little bit faster for lo-fi house, but it works really well with this more upbeat sort of feel. And the first sound here is this E-piano. So the chord progression here, there's a very basic chord progression that's being played. It's A sharp minor, B major, and then D sharp minor, which the minor third there. So we're going. So it's this kind of, actually very simple, kind of jazzy, but very smooth chord progression. And then we're just using extra notes on top of that to accentuate it. So, for example, here, so this is actually just a basic A sharp minor chord there, because we have the root note, minor third, and then the fifth. But then we're also using a D sharp and an A sharp up top. So like, yeah, having that, that's the fourth actually. And then another root note there. Here we have, so there's the B major, but then we also have a major seventh. So you get kind of like that sort of more melancholic feel out of it. It's not just like a totally major chord. And then here there's even just like taking that F sharp, which should be right there, but then putting it up an octave. Just all these little ways that you voice the chords using different notes that are already just pretty basic things fitting into the scale. Essentially, that's what's going to kind of create these very like lush and smooth chords like this. So I recommend starting with a basic progression. Again, just use like triads or even dyads, and then you can go and move and add these extra notes. And you'll notice there's kind of like different layers of things too. So for example, like that's kind of like the basic chords, but then there's also that melody happening. There's that melody happening. There's that, like, there's a lot of little, like, interactions between the notes here that are essentially going to create these kind of, like, nice, smooth chords that aren't just going to be, like, a basic major and minor chord, but you can still at least, like, tell what's going on there. So for the sound on this one, it's this EP faceplant. It's one of the Ableton racks, actually. You know, with these like more Rhodes kind of like electric piano sounds, it's best to really just use something where it's like a sample and it's going to be really authentic and actually give you that sound. So that's why I had that. I've also got a bit of reverb on that. We have some drum bus, which you can see is pretty heavy. It's on the soft setting, but I'm compressing this, and we're also using the damp knob a lot. So the compression and the damp knob on drum bus are actually really good for lo-fi house. You're going to see that throughout here. That like just turning that down, because what it's essentially doing with the damp knob there is you're cutting off the highs in like a very minor way. Like it's not the same as if you just take like a low pass filter and just cut it like that. It's like a very, like they're still in there. It's just you're kind of like making it a bit more dull, and that's really going to give it that lo-fi house kind of texture. And then the compression just makes it kind of more like that flattened, just really full sounding lo-fi sort of feel. Then we just have it being sidechains in the cake, and I have a high pass filter, because even though this is lo-fi house, you still want to keep things pretty clean mix wise. Then we have this lead, which I'll play that with the chords so you can hear it. So yeah, you can hear this is a pretty simple lead. It's pretty much following the progression, right? Because it goes A sharp, B, and then down to D sharp. And then all these other notes here, you know, those are just notes from that D sharp minor scale. Again, that's the key we're in. And they're pretty straightforward notes too. You can see, so like root note, fourth, fifth, minor seventh, another fifth, and then right back down to that root note. So like, even here it's just that minor third. So really, like, once you know pretty basic minor scales, you can make this kind of stuff. Like, I think people hear these kinds of leads and think it's so hard. It's really just getting creative within the confines of these, like, pretty basic major and minor scales. And trying to write something catchy, you know, like, instead of going to, like, an extra note here, like, I could have done maybe that. That might be cool, but it's actually better to repeat a note there. It's just gonna make it a bit more catchy. Because it's just simpler if you just like repeat that note. You know, just knowing like little tricks like that to make catchy leads with these scales. Now for the sound on this one, it's a pretty simple operator patch. FM synthesis is really good for these kind of like more 80s style like windy leads like this. So all it is it's actually just 2 sine waves here. You can see I've got an envelope on the first one set like that. And then what's making these kind of nice is the detune there. Like you're kind of just getting this like a little bit more spicy, so to speak, sine wave. And then that detune is just giving it lots of movement and kind of like... It's a really subtle way to bring the sound to life. And then we just have some reverb, as well as a bit of drum bus. Again, you can see that same thing where we're using the damp knob pretty low and the compression. And then finally it's just being sidechained to the kick, and that's the lead. Then we have the bass. Which is really simple. You can see it just follows the chord progression, just the root notes. I've added in this little like movement there up to F sharp. The only thing here is just writing like a nice pattern. You want this to really bounce off of your kick. Yeah, you don't want just like doom, doom. It's not really gonna have any groove. That groove that you're hearing in this track, it has a lot more to do with the kick and the bass than it does with like the drums per se. So for the actual sound on the bass, it's a pretty simple FM patch. You can see we're just using 4 sine waves here. They're all in different octaves. And then we're low passing them. So here's without that. And then with it. So yeah, you can hear it's like this very fat sounding bass, and then we're just taking the low end. And then I've also used the sine shaper on that. So it's almost like a sine wave bass, but it's just a bit fatter, and it's got a bit more harmonic content. And then it's just being sidechained to the kick. Then we have this little vocal lead. So yeah, the melody for this one, it's using the 4th, the 5th, and then the 6th. That's literally it. So again, like using less notes is always better when you're just trying to make a little like there's no reason to go and like jump all across the keyboard, even if the notes are in the scale. Just pick like 3 notes like this and make a little pattern like this, and it makes like for a very catchy little kind of just lead that jumps in there. So for the sound, it's this vocal lead sample, but then what I've done, so here's the original sample. What I've done is you can see we actually use the filter envelope here. So I have the low pass filter on, and then I've got an envelope on that. So it creates this really cool kind of like plucky vocal lead, which is not really a texture that you would usually use with vocals, but you can hear. It's really cool. Like, it just creates a really interesting lead. I would even use this in like a techno track or something, you know? It just sounds like a very like detuned kind of like ravey lead. And yeah, and then that's just going through a bit of echo and then some drum bus just to make it a bit more full sounding. And that also brings out the echo a little bit. And then we have this pad. So you can see, this just follows the chord progression of the track. And then here, these are only just playing 2 notes at a time. So these are what I was talking about when I was saying dyads. Just chords that are just 2 notes. And it's just kind of accentuating what's already happening with the chord progression. So you can hear like, yeah, it's actually really straightforward. These are actually just the basic chords. Like you can see, yeah, it's literally just the basic chords, but then we kind of create a melody with those top notes by taking these and putting them up an octave, and then this one really should be down there, in theory, but then it goes up another octave. So that creates like a really epic feel when you have like a super low bass note and a super high lead note like that. And yeah, this really helps to fill out the track too. Like if I turn this off, it's really missing something. Like in the mid-range, but then when we turn this on, it fits in there nicely. So, for the sound here, it's made with analog. We just have 2 saw waves. We have a low-pass filter, which has the envelope set like that. You can see it's got a tiny bit of attack just to give it like a whoop at the start of the sound. And then we have the amp envelope like that. I have a bit of unison. And then after the synth, we have some chorus, some reverb. You can see the size is pretty low, so it's not super heavy. It's just giving it a little bit more of like a room kind of thing. Then we have this drum bus, which is pretty heavy on this. If I turn it off, you can see it's a lot more pristine. So this is how we kind of mess it up and make it more lo-fi. It just gives it like a really nice crunch, and the compression kind of brings out that reverb and makes the sound just feel more like, yeah, crushed like that, but not in like an over-compressed way, just kind of giving it a nice texture. Then we just have a high-pass filter and a compressor, which is side-chaining this to the kick. And then the next sound we have here, the last sort of like lead synth type of sound here, is this house organ. So yeah, here's the MIDI for this. You can see this is just like that really bouncy, like kind of 90s style. Almost like some Italian deep house type stuff for sure, but like, you know, it's just kind of playing over the whole thing. It's like we have kind of different layers of leads. So we have this one, which is long and holding out. That one, which just adds some nice little notes here and there. And then this one, again, is just like that main one that's going to almost kind of be in the background, but it's really holding things down. Like, if I turn this off, it's really missing something. So really, you just have to try and write, like, this kind of lead where it's going to hold out the notes a little bit longer, but then it's like the bouncy pattern. You know, it's not just like... But you actually get that like dun 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 dun, and it just sits really well on a house track like this because it's kind of combining the melodic with the rhythmic. In theory, that's like what this music is all about. So for the sound, it's just that classic house organ sample. I believe this is like from the Korg M1. We have a bit of echo and a bit of reverb. And then I have this EQ here, which I'm going to show you a little bit more of this in a moment. But I wanted to show you this. This is a technique to just kind of cut off some of those highs without like way over low passing it. Like we're just cutting off those like kind of like frequencies that you heard when I turned it off. But you can hear with it, it's super subtle, but it just gives it that like perfect kind of lo-fi texture. You know, it just really makes it feel a bit more washed out. And then we have some drum bus, a high-pass filter, and then a compressor, just side-chaining this to the kick. So that's it for all the synths. You can see it's a pretty big stack, you know, it's 6 synths going on at once. But they all come together, and if you write the parts in the right way, you can do it without actually, like, making it too full. You know, it's still going to be, like, some space in the track, but obviously there's a lot going on. So then we move down to the drums, which starts with the 707 here. Which if I play it with the hi-hat. So you can hear that's giving you all those little shakers, and also that crash there, which just sounds nice. This is actually just Ableton's 707. I don't have any processing on it here, but it is being very heavily processed by the stuff that's on the master, which I'll show you. So again, that's just like a nice way to get that more kind of classic, like swingy 90s house sort of feel with the drums. I think using these classic drum machine sounds is really the way to go with this style of house. And then we just have a 909 kick, which you can see is actually unprocessed. So a lot of times you probably think with lo-fi house, you know, you want to way saturate your kick and do tons of drum bus. You actually still want to approach it from like a pretty like pristine standpoint, if that makes any sense. Like, I'm still keeping the kick really clean. It's just about having like a good hard-hitting 909 kick here. And that's all you need. It's not going to need to be like saturated a million times. I am shortening this a little bit to get rid of some of that bass in the kick. But yeah, and then we have these drums. So what's happening here is we have most of these just in one group, and then there's this one outside of here. And the reason for this is because, essentially, it's all to do with the hi-hat. So if you listen to the drums in the group, and you'll see on this group here, we have this EQ doing that same kind of like, just cutting off the very high highs. But we actually didn't want that on this one. You see, it's really subtle, but just having, this one actually does have a low pass filter on it, but it's just like not as much. But just having one layer that's outside of that group that can, again, not just bring in like the, you don't really want those frequencies, you still want that to be missing, but it can just bring in like a little bit more high frequency while you have these drums underneath. They're just like really solid and fat. So yeah, that's kind of the secret, because if you just make your hi-hats really lo-fi and just like all of them are going through the low-pass filter, it'll sound lo-fi, but it's not going to sound good. This kind of gives it some more like professionalism, I feel. Again, you can hear the difference there. But yeah, and then the last thing down here is just this atmosphere. There's some classic vinyl noise. I have that same trick of just cutting off the high highs to make this feel a bit more lo-fi. So then the last thing I want to talk about here is actually going to be master processing. You can see on the master here, so we have some compression and some limiting. Just to start off with, these aren't actually doing that much. Like, this is just kind of a basic master here. We're really just using the compressor on the very peaks of the peaks there. And then you'll notice it's not actually clipping going into the limiter. We're just using the limiter to boost the volume. So this is a pretty standard way of mastering a track. But you'll also notice before that, we actually have a high cut. So we're using an EQ8 here and putting a low pass filter on the master, which is like, yeah, it seems crazy, but it works really well here because a big part of the lo-fi house sound is everything kind of having an even texture. Like, it needs to feel like it's all coming from the same place. Like, you put it all into the same cassette or the same, whatever it is. So master processing, in theory, is the best way to do that, right? Because it's like, you know, why would you sit there and like put the same thing on everything individually when you could just put it on the master and then it's going to kind of just give it all the same texture essentially because it's going through the same processing. And yeah, I'll show you. Here's without it. It's just a little bit too pristine. And then with it, it fits in there perfectly now. So yeah, that's something that you want to keep in mind. Like, it's not always just about going to each individual one and doing the low pass filter, but also low passing the master just a little tiny bit like this. Again, we're not going to do too much, but just cutting off those high highs. There's still some of it coming through, you can see. It's just a good way to kind of make everything feel more authentically lo-fi. And yeah, so that's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video that I just showed you is available right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp. This really helps support me. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.